There's one very special book that I told myself I was absolutely going to read at some point this year. It's one of the biggest books in the Christian world besides the Bible, but it's December now and I still haven't read it. So in this video, I'm finally going to be reading and reviewing this book to see if it's really worth the hype. Also, since it is December now, I'm going to be telling you all the top 5 books I read this year, ending with my absolute favorite, which at this point might honestly be my favorite book of all time. So my first favorite book of this year is a thriller, and although it doesn't have the prettiest cover, trust me, the story is so good. It's called The Oath by Frank Peretti. I feel like I have talked about this book a lot, but that's because I just really enjoyed it. This book is about a small town where the residents start mysteriously go missing and the main character is trying to figure out why. And he eventually discovers that there's a dangerous predator taunting the town, which just makes everything much more dangerous and suspenseful. There's a bunch of very interesting characters in the story, and there's even a subplot of romance. This book gave me major Stephen King vibes. Ever since I read this book, I've been recommending it all the time just because I feel like it's one of those stories that pretty much everyone can enjoy. Now it's time for book number 2. Okay, so the mega popular Christian book that I've heard so much about and that I've been wanting to read since the beginning of this year is Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. I've heard so many good things about this book, so I'm very excited to start it, so let's start reading. Okay, so I've been reading this book for the majority of today so far. I'm on chapter 5. So the book is starting off kind of slow, but I can understand why. Like, it's starting off with giving you this good background of like first and foremost showing how the world pretty much proves God's existence. And it's very detailed and in some ways kind of hard to keep up with, but I am so far. I didn't expect that to be the way this begins because I kind of always assumed that people reading this book are Christians already, but I actually really love that he's doing this first, and I can imagine this like proof he's building up is gonna eventually go into helping him prove his later points and whatever he's talking about throughout the rest of the book. It's just really cool. Pretty much anytime I read a C.S. Lewis book, I'm always kind of in awe of how smart he is. Even in his fiction books, you can tell how knowledgeable he is about theology. It's just always a great time reading his books. I also think that the fact that I've read a bunch of C.S. Lewis before helps me to understand his writing style in this better because again, it is a little bit more of a complicated book. So again, it's starting off a little bit slow, but I understand why and I'm enjoying it at the same time. So as I've been kind of like reflecting on all my favorite books of this year, it made me really excited for all the new books I'm going to start next year. And I actually went ahead and picked out the first one I'm going to read after this one, probably in the beginning of January. And I'm so excited for it, but also kind of terrified because it's the first book in a massive series. I think it's 12 books, but the story sounds so good, like something that I would actually love so much. So I really want to try it, and I've already bought it. I've been seeing it over here sitting on my bookshelf for a little while now. It is also a Christian fiction book, so if you know what it is, Christian fiction, a 12-book series, let me know if you can guess. I'm going to show it by the end of the video, so try and guess now if you can figure out what it is. I'm just so excited to start reading it. So my second favorite book of the year is the first book in a sci-fi series by C.S. Lewis. Just warning you now, you're going to be seeing a lot of C.S. Lewis in this video. I've slowly discovered throughout this year that he's probably my favorite author. This one is called Out of the Silent Planet. So this book is a little bit harder to explain because although I loved it, I usually don't recommend it to everyone just because it's one of those books that you have to put a lot of effort in to fully understand. At least I kind of did. There's so much theological metaphor and allegory, and I feel like if you don't get all of that, the story isn't going to be quite as good just like on its own. Basically, it's about a guy who travels to another planet and explores it and discovers the different creatures living on it, and then eventually plays a big role in protecting it from other people who want to harm it. I just feel like this book has a very specific taste, so if you like Christian allegory and deep theology and also sci-fi, you'll probably really love this book like I did. As you're definitely going to be able to tell as this list goes on, I've read a lot of Christian fiction this year, but this next one is actually a book that's not technically known for being a Christian book, at least not really, but it's still my third favorite of the year. This book is probably the most surprising book to me that it's on this list because it's just one of those books that I typically wouldn't like, and yet somehow I really enjoyed it, and that is The Lord of the Rings. So I talked a lot about this in my review of this book, but there were definitely some slow moments, and I kind of want to just warn everyone of that before they start this book, if anyone hasn't read it yet, which most most people have. There were for sure some moments where I kind of wished that I could like just fast forward or something. But the more that I read it, the more that I realized those slow moments were super necessary to just understand the world so much better and get more invested in the story. As most people know, this is one of those books where the world is so big and so immersive that it feels like you're living in the book as you're reading it. And maybe you do kind of have to be in the right mood to appreciate this book and give it a good chance. But I guess just when I read it, I was in the perfect mood, and by the end, I was loving this whole story. Now it's time for my fourth favorite book. So I'm now on page 85 of this book. I've been flying through it pretty quickly. I'm actually really surprised about that because, like I said, this is a nonfiction book. Have I said that? This is a nonfiction book, which might be part of why I've kind of been pushing it off throughout the year because I usually just prefer to read fiction. But this one is going really well, and so far, it's worth the hype. So kind of like I said before, the whole first few chapters of this book were building kind of like proof for Christianity, and he did it in the coolest way possible, which basically proved that everything about the world and the way that we think in our existence has to, like, literally has to point to there being some kind of creator. It's hard to explain it all, and I feel like I would stay here forever if I were to try to explain it, but you should just read the book to find out. I will read this one quote about it that I feel like just proved it so well to me. So he's talking about how his perspective was when he used to be an atheist, and he says, "My argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how had I gotten this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. Of course, I could have given up my idea of justice by saying it was nothing but a private idea of my own. But if I did that, then my argument against God collapsed too, for the argument depended on saying that the world was really unjust, not simply that it did not happen to please my fancies. Thus, in the very act of trying to prove that God did not exist, I found I was forced to assume that one part of reality was full of sense. Consequently, atheism turns out to be too simple. If the whole universe has no meaning, we should have never found out that it has no meaning." I had to read that a couple of times when I first saw it, but it did kind of blow my mind. So it's just been set up in a really cool way, and I'm very excited to keep reading it. So my fourth favorite book of the year is one that people had been recommending me to read for ages before I actually started it. It's a Francine Rivers book, which is an author I hadn't loved in the past, but I'm so glad I decided to try this one. It is called A Voice in the Wind. This is about a girl in biblical times who's a slave to a really rich family. Where she's living, it's very abnormal to have such a strong faith, but my favorite part about this book is that she's able to stick to it and influence a lot of people around her in a very positive way. This also has a love story in it. There's also so many different characters with their own storylines going on. To me, Francine Rivers writes characters with the most character depth, and you see that a lot in this book. And just warning you now, it has an insane ending, and you'll probably have to pick up the rest of the books in this series as soon as you're done with this one. So I definitely recommend this book to those out there who really love Christian fiction. Now it's time for the fifth book on my list, which also happens to be my absolute favorite of the year, and is kind of turning into my favorite book of all time at this point. So now that he's established like the basis of the proof for Christianity in the first few sections, now with each chapter he's going through different parts of life and just, I guess, like the human experience, but talking about them from a Christian perspective. Like, for example, the chapter I'm about to start is on forgiveness, and it's just so cool because all of that background information helps me to see everything he's saying now in just a different light. So it's really cool. I have a decent amount left, but I also have a lot of time to read today, so I'm hoping that I might be able to finish it today. As you can probably tell, I've read a ton of Christian fiction this year. I was looking over my Goodreads, and there were only a small handful of books that I read that weren't Christian books. I've just been loving the way that Christian fiction allows me to indulge in my love for reading, but also helps me to learn more about God in the process. If you've been watching some of my videos this year, you would know that it can be pretty hard to find good Christian fiction. They can at times be a little bit cringy, but when you find a good one, it's so worth it. Like Mere Christianity, which I have now finished and I love. I feel like I genuinely learned so much throughout this entire book. I also feel so much more prepared now to prove like what I believe to other people, which is something I didn't think I would get out of this book. It's books like these that honestly motivate me so much to read more Christian books, which is why I'm super excited to start what I think is going to be one of the more challenging books in the beginning of January, which is called Left Behind. Like I said, this is part of a 12-book series, so we'll see if I'll be able to do that. And the last book on my list, which also happens to be my favorite book of the year, is A Greek Mythology by C.S. Lewis. See, I told you you'd be hearing a lot about him. It's one of the coolest Christian allegories about two sisters who go through a lot of turmoil at the expense of their father, believing in appeasing the gods in order to basically get good luck in his life. The main girl grows to hate the gods because of this, but then eventually she realizes that it's a lot of her own selfishness that causes most of the pain in her life. This book has a lot to do with spiritual blindness and the concept of like you can only really understand God if you're willing to show your true self to him, like sins and all. It's one of those books that I feel like I'm going to be able to read over and over and over again and understand something new each time I finish it. And kind of unlike the other C.S. Lewis book I was talking about, this one is actually a really great story even if you don't fully understand all of the like theological metaphors. So ignore how terrible my cover looks, but it's Till We Have Faces. It's just so good and I think everyone should read it at some point in their life. And I can't wait to hopefully find some more amazing books like this one in the coming year. And also before you go, please let me know some of your favorite books from this year. I think a lot of you have a similar book taste to me and I'm trying to build a really strong TBR for 2026, so let me know.